First of all, I would like to thank Professor Mishra ji for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts with my colleagues who are junior to me in the field of law. Of course, I took birth earlier to all of them, so I am senior by that virtue also. The topic I'm going to speak is right to information and good governance. Uh, when I saw the main topic or the main theme of this refresher course, that is new frontiers in the law, then I thought that RTI is one of that law which qualifies the topic. Right to information is one of that topic which comes within this new frontiers of law, because Right to Information Act acts like a frontier warrior to treat the virus of secrecy and to bring the good governance. Because we all know that we were in a system which was conducted in a secrecy. We were having the official secret acts and we were having a complete steel framework of the bureaucracy. So, in that way, we see that the secrecy was the rule of the day and transparency was only an exception. So, in that way, that now we are moving from secrecy to transparency, and this is something which is directly attacking this new frontiers of law, and that's why this RTI, which is also an attack on the confidentiality, and it's a frontier for transparency. It is a must for the democracy, and hence I have chosen this topic. And I'll discuss on right to information, then constitutional foundations, and then the good governance and the impact of right to information on the good governance in the country within the framework of the Constitution of India, that is the supreme law of the land. So I would be starting with one of the quote which is there in the Rig Veda, and that speaks about the working, that is in order to achieve good result, a pious objective is determined first and then followed by good karma for its accomplishment. So, this is something which is already in existence in our system, in our culture, in our tradition, that we should follow the path of the karma for all our work, and then we will find that everything would be in a good and pious objective. This is how we can interpret the working of the RTI in the system of the good governance in India. In India, we see that the legislature has been working towards achieving this objective of the good governance. Examples can be seen right from the constitution in its preamble and the provisions which are relating to the fundamental rights, fundamental duties, directive principles, and so forth and so on. Besides the constitutional provisions, there are specific legislations, particularly I'm talking about the Right to Information Act of 2005, and then some of the legislations which are related to the environment, some gender specific laws are also there. So these are all having, we can say, a good example of the good governance in the country, which form the basis for the development of transparency, and we can say ultimately it lays down the foundation for the rule of law. Because when we talk about the Constitution of India, then it comes from that constitution that a rule of law is to be there, and we find that in our country we are being governed by the rule of law. This is a concept which we find through the constitutional provisions, and as it is said by Justice P.N. Bhagwati also, that the thread of rule of law is running through the entire provisions of the constitution, and that's why we see that there are various legislations, there are various policies, there are various programs which are there for enhancing the rule of law and good governance in the country. So the attempt of the legislatures are there towards achieving this objective. Then with the advancement of the society, we also see that judiciary has also played a very important role in bringing the good governance, because the prosperity and development that is imbibed in the good governance can be traced through the robust justice delivery system of the country, because judiciary has done very well in that respect, and Right to Information Act to some extent can be said to be the brainchild of the judicial interpretation. So it depicts that the democratic values are not only superficial or something which cannot be achieved, but they are deeply rooted. They are deeply rooted in the system. And it is only through that securing justice we find that the basic human rights of the people are effectively protected also. Access to justice that is based on the principle that the general public should know and they should rely upon the proper application of law. So these are all being done by the justice delivery system, that is the judiciary in our country. And we see that some of the citizens, they are not aware about their rights, and some of those they are aware but they cannot reach to the court of law, or they are deprived of their rights, they cannot go to the court of law. And for that some systematic solutions are also made for access to justice, so that the governance can be bring in the system properly. And for that you see the provisions in the constitution, article 22 is there, then in CRPC you find 303 and 304 that support this cause of access to justice. There have been the creation of SALSA, State Legal Service Authority, and District Legal Services Authority at the district level and the state level, respectively. You see that these are the bodies, these ensure the free legal aid to the citizen who are not there or who cannot avail them or who cannot afford to reach to the court of law. So they all provide the we can say an opportunity to make a legal representation before the court of law. And this is all because of the justice delivery system which we find in our country. So in that backdrop we find that a right to information, that is considered to be a very very powerful tool or a powerful key for strengthening the democracy and for enhancing the good governance in the country. When we say that information is the key, so it works in the democratic process of the country. It is used for curbing or controlling the corruption, or for we can say for the inefficient working in the public offices. It is also important for the realization of the human rights. It is important for the purpose of the human development as a whole. So information is that key which brings the governance to a good governance and which curbs the corruption, because RTI is also one of the tool to control the corruption also, because when there would be transparency then the corruption would be lessened down. So this is how we find that right to information is the tool, is a key for bringing or enhancing the good governance. But to see that whether we were having this right to information from the very beginning or not, no, we were having the secrecy as the most common feature of bureaucratic culture, as I told you. And there was one statement, observation of Max Weber, when he said that the administration that hides everything, and it hides its knowledge and action from the criticism. And the concept of this official secret is a very, very specific invention of the bureaucracy. This is because of the bureaucratic functioning in our country that we find, or we have gone for the secrecy. And the Indian bureaucracy has inherited this administrative culture of the secrecy from the colonial feudal legacy. We all know that we were in the slavery of the Britishers for more than 2 centuries, and thereby we find that the bureaucracy was on the highest pedestal and everything was in secrecy. And prior to that also you see that there was Kautilya's Arthashastra that also laid down about something like the secrecy, when he said about that the deliberations which are to be made in a council, deliberations which are made to before in the kingdom, that shall be so carried that even the birds cannot see them. Whatever deliberations are going on, the birds cannot see them. For it is said that the secrecy of the council, if it was divulged by the parrots, हम सभी जानते हैं कि वो तोता और मैना और कुत्ता और जो इस तरीके के जानवर तक थे, जो creatures थे, they were taking the things, or they were divulging whatever is being done in the secrecy. So that's why This was the observation in one of the books of that Kautilya's Arthashastra, and we find that he was of the opinion that this secrecy shall be carried out, and that should not be seen by the words. And whosoever will disclose these things, then he should be torn in pieces. मतलब उसके साथ बहुत बुरा व्यवहार किया जाएगा अगर कोई भी इस तरीके की secrecy को बाहर लाता है. So secrecy was the rule, transparency was the exception. It is not only that we were having the Britishers' legacy or the Kautilya's Arthashastra, we were having I mean, legislations also. Some of those are still in existence in our country, and we are also implementing those provisions which provides for the secrecy, because this is a problem regarding the secrecy, that much of the common persons, they are distressed and they are helplessness is traceable to the lack of the access to the information and the lack of knowledge of decision making processes. For example, this Official Secrets Act, you must have heard about this Official Secrets Act of 1923. This throws a veil of secrecy on the government procedure. Particularly, if you see Section 5 of the Official Secrets Act of 1923, that makes an offense for the public servant to disclose any of the information that come to their knowledge in the official capacity. So whatever comes in the official capacity of the officer, that cannot be divulged, that cannot be revealed to anyone. And if it would be there, then it would be punishable, or the penalty would be there. Then Indian Evidence Act of 1872, you see Section 123 and Section 124 of this Indian Evidence Act. You see Section 123 prohibits that regarding the evidence, if giving of the evidence from the unpublished official records, without the permission giving of this by the head of the department or head of the concerned ministry, then who has abundant discretion in that manner, that would not be there. This is 123 Evidence Act. Similarly, you see 124, it also speaks about the communications which are made in the official capacity. So official confidences, and they are not to be disclosed. So we see that there is a special privilege for the state also not to disclose the documents, and this is by virtue of Section 123 and 124 of the Indian Evidence Act, which brings the secrecy in the system and which is not providing for any type of the transparency or openness. Then we find that the Law Commission in its 169th report, it was in 1977, and 88th report of 1983, they have suggested that this section of 123 should be revised. Section 123 of the Indian Evidence Act should be revised. Then the suggestions were also given, recommendations were also given by the Shuri committee regarding 123 and 124. And finally, you see that the National Commission to the review for the working of the Constitution. So when it was examining the right to information, then this commission said that in fact we should take the oath of transparency in place of the oath of secrecy. So why to take the oath of secrecy in a country which is democratic in nature? So in a democracy, openness is to be there. In a democracy, the transparency is to be there. Why we are taking the oath of the secrecy? The oath should be of the transparency. So this was the recommendation of the NCRWC, National Commission, which was there for reviewing the working of the Constitution. Again, we find the provisions in the CCS conduct rules which are restricting the information, particularly Rule 11 of the CCS rules. Then we find that because we have chosen for the democracy, as Justice Bhagwati in SP Gupta case also and Raj Narayan case also was of the opinion that in a democracy, the openness is to be there, the transparency is to be there, because these are the cradle faith for the democracy or democratic nation. So we find that a movement is started towards the need for the right to information, and to make the access to the information was having a reality for every citizen. Because if the citizens representative are working in the governance and what they are doing, it is not made known to the citizens, then how and why they should choose and why they should send those representatives to the parliament, to the governance, if what they are doing, it is not being made known to them. So to make access to information a reality for every citizen, this Right to Information Act was required, and to make operational the fundamental right to information, because by virtue of Raj Narayan and after that SP Gupta, the Supreme Court has also interpreted in a very, very expansive manner this freedom of speech and expression to include the right to know and right to information. So how this right to information has to be made operational, this was also a need to bring the right to information, then to set up the systems and mechanisms that facilitate the access to information, because once it would be a fundamental right under 19(1)(a) and 21 as such, then there would be no mechanism besides the High Court and the Supreme Court. So some mechanism was also required so that one can access to the information, and this was also bringing the need of the right to information, then to promote transparency, of course, and accountability, and to enable the people's participation in the governance, to minimize the corruption, which was, I mean, rampant in the society, in the rampant in the governance system, and the inefficiency of the public offices, that was all there, which was thinking about the need of the right to information. So we all know that our parliamentarians, they are chosen representative of all the citizens of the country, and if something has to be brought by them against themselves, then naturally it is not going to be very, very easy task, and right to information cannot be brought therein. And that's why you see that public started its initiative, and the courts ruling to have their impact, and they are binding in the cases which are there delivered by the Supreme Court. In many of the cases, they are very, very specific to the parties, and there is no clear constitutional guarantee for that. So statutory recognition of that right becomes very, very necessary. And we see that because of this veil of secrecy that not only protects the governance or the government and bureaucracy, it also covers the corruption, it also covers the arbitrariness, it also covers the malified exercise of the power by the bureaucrats, by the government. And in this process, we see that a guild or a group or a union of the politicians in power and the bureaucratic persons or the bureaucrats, that is formed. Because everyone knows that the most of the government funds which are meant for the development and the public welfare, these funds are being siphoned by the nexus of these politicians and the bureaucrats groups and guilds. And the nexus of the bureaucrats and ministers is very, very old, and the Administrative Reforms Committee under the chairmanship of Morarji Desai, that has long back recommended for the institution of the Lokpal and Lok Ayuks to check such corruption. And in the year 2007, Justice Markandeya Katju, when he was there in the Supreme Court, then when he was hearing one of the case, then he said that the corrupt politician should be hung up the nearest lamppost. So this was his style of working. And he said like this, then this shows, all these things shows that there was how pervasiveness of this corruption was deeply rooted in the system. And though we see that the office of the Lokpal, Lok Ayukt that have been established in the states as well as the central Lokpal is there, but the working of the Lokpal continues still to be a will of the wish. That is only something which can be said to be a dream like thing. So it's not working properly. We have not checked the survey on that point, that how much work is being done by the Lokpal institution, but still we see that the corruption is there. So the exposure of corruption is an important method of checking the corruption, and this is possible only when there is a free flow of the information from the government to the people concerned. And public spirited person, you must have heard about Anna Hazare, S.D. Shuri, and particularly with reference to the Right to Information Act, Arna Roy, and then Mr. Shankar Singh, Mr. Nikhil Dey, they were there along with that Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sanghathan of the Rajasthan. And they have added this thing that how to bring the transparency in the system, how to bring the Right to Information Act. So they all fought for that, and they struggled against the corruption with the weapon of right to information since 1990, particularly 1987 perhaps. And this was their brahmastra, that जन सुनवाई is to be their public hearing होनी चाहिए, कि किस तरीके से काम हो रहा है और उसमें किस तरीके से सुनवाई की जा सकती है. So in such type of the public hearings, we see the public demanded the accountability from the government servants and the legislators who were there in the system. And they also demanded the copies of the documents, particularly the master rolls concerning the development programs. And these documents are then read out in the public meetings also. You see that in many of the cases, the master rolls, when they were provided in that right to information, those were containing the names of those persons who were either died or who have left the village, who were not in existence. जो पैसा था वो कहाँ जा रहा था? उन लोगों के नाम से जो या तो मर चुके थे, या जो उस गांव में नहीं रहते थे, या जो वहां पर थे नहीं. तो ये सब चीजें कैसे पता चली? जब मास्टर रोल्स जो दिखाए गए उसका जब राइट टू इंफॉर्मेशन में उनको दिखाया गया. सो this is not confined here only. Similar was the story with the materials which were supplied and used also for the construction things. And this process of Jan Sunwai, that was not easy one. And many hurdles, many obstacles were faced by these persons who were there, who wanted to bring this right to information in system. And you see that Rajasthan chief minister, he assured that now we can go for giving the photocopies of those documents which are related to the panchayat, because this right to information movement started in Rajasthan. We were at that Jaipur and Jaipur, and from from there, that was basically related to the working of the panchayat system and how the construction work is going on, how the system is working. So we see that the chief minister has allowed for the providing of the photocopies, but in practice there was no change in that system. And after the struggle of this Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, we see that Freedom of Information Act 2000 was passed. But that Freedom of Information Act 2000 was not having proper machinery as to how to ask for the information, what has to be there. If the information is not being provided, then what is the remedy thereafter? So that act could not be implemented. But you see that at other state levels, some of the state government, they have state assemblies, they have legislated for the right to information in 1997. It was Tamil Nadu Right to Information Act, Goa Right to Information Act of 1997. And then we see when this 2000 Act came into existence, it was not implemented due to various lacunae. Then again, the demand was continued for the parliamentary legislation of this right to information. And finally, we find that this Right to Information Act of 2005 was enacted. So how this Right to Information Act 2005 came into existence, that was since 1990. VP Singh, he was the Prime Minister of India. He stressed the need for a legislative enactment on that. Then since 1987 to 1990, 2000, this MKSS movement, and that was also related to the bringing of this Right to Information Act. Then you see that Press Council of India and H.D. Shuri's report. Then the Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee in 1998 also announced that Right to Information Act has to be there. And then 2000 Freedom of Information Bill, which was having certain lacunae. And then in 2002, the NDA government that enacted the Freedom of Information Act, that was later on termed as the Right to Information Act. And on June 15th, this Right to Information Act came into existence. So this is how we see that how this legislation came into existence on June 15, 2005, and fully operative from October 12th, 2005. So when this Right to Information Act 2005 came into existence, it was enacted. So it was seen as to usher an era of empowerment of the common man in India. How the citizens would be empowered by this particular act. This was seen by the enactment of this 2005. And this legislative initiative that has emerged as one of the most effective instrument to check the corruption particularly, because one can examine, one can audit, one can review, and access to the government files, government works, government decisions. And when this is to be there, these type of the provisions are to be there, then naturally it can ensure the transparency, it can ensure the openness in the system, it can ensure the accountability, it can ensure some effectiveness of the working. And we can say to a big extent this right to information act, and that has actuated the enforcement of the rule of law. As I started with the rule of law, so this right to information can be said to be one of the enforcement machinery for completely implementing rule of law. So this particular act of 2005, it provided for the establishment of some public authorities, the mechanism, the information commissioners at center level, at state level, and all the grievances related things, those are to be taken care with this right to information. Then coming to the good governance, then we find that in the words of Kofi Annan, that good governance is perhaps the single most important factor for eradicating poverty and promoting development. So two things are there. If we need good governance, then it would eradicate the poverty and it will promote the development, which is one of the very important requirement for any nation to flourish. And that's how, if there would be good governance, then it needs that the poverty should not be there and promotion should be there, of or all the development should be there. Then we can say that there is a good governance in the particular country. So governance is something which is the exercise of economic, political, and administrative authorities to manage the affairs at all the levels. And it consists of the mechanism, it consists of the processes, institutions, which can meet the obligations, which can mediate the differences between the person concerned. And this is what we see that Right to Information Act has brought with the provisions thereof. And without good governance, we find that no amount of development schemes can bring the improvement in or in the quality of the life of the citizens. And strengthening governance is one of the essential precondition for the improvement of the lives of the poor concerned. Then good governance is a widely used term. And so it is necessary to understand as to what is good governance. And when we talk about the good governance, then there are two words, good and governance. The concept of governance, that is not new. It is as old as the human civilization. We all know, simply put, governance, that means the process of decision making and the process by which the decisions are implemented or not implemented also. It's not always that all the decisions would be implemented. If the decisions are implemented, then it would result into good governance. If the decisions are not implemented, naturally it would result into the bad governance, but governance would be there. So this is not a new thing. This process is there for the decision making, and that process of the decision that are implemented and not implemented would be the decisive factor that whether there is good governance or bad governance. So governance can be used in several contexts. You must have heard about the corporate governance, international governance, national governance, local governance. So all these things are there. But there are certain key attributes of the governance, because if we see the literature, then we find that various organizations, institutions, they have interpreted governance in their own term. The human rights agencies, the UHCHR, High Commissioner of the Human Rights, they have given certain attributes to the good governance. Then UNDP has given some of the attributes for the good governance. World Bank, where from it has started the good governance, they have given different these attributes to the good governance. But overall, we find that some of the common attributes are there in all these institutional functions, which speaks about that, or they have identified that yes, these are the key attributes of the good governance, and in that we find that transparency is one of them. So there must be a transparency for good governance, there must be responsibility in the good governance, there must be accountability in the good governance. It should be participatory, because we are talking about the governance, so it should be participatory, and it should be responsive. There should be responsiveness also, responsiveness towards the need of the person, because governance is for whom? Governance is for the governed, and that's why responsiveness is very important key factor or key attribute, or we can say the characteristic of the good governance, besides being effective and efficient, besides being equitable and inclusive in nature, because ours is a country which is I mean diversified in various aspects. We see we are having a different culture, different caste, different categories, different languages, different things. Diversity is seen here in our country. So for that, equitability as well as inclusiveness is also very important for the good governance and overall the rule of law. So it all these characteristics or key attributes of this good governance, they assures that corruption is minimized, and the views of the minorities are taken into account, and the voices of those who are said to be most vulnerable in the society, and they can be heard in the decision making. Vulnerable are those persons who are not bringing, or who are not in the mainstream of the society in the governance. They may be old age person, they may be the children, they may be the women, they may be the SC/ST persons, they may be disabled persons, they may be persons who are not bodily fit, as having certain diseases, etc. So these are the persons who are termed as the vulnerable persons, and to bring them in the mainstream, to bring them in the decision making, and their views are to be heard. That is also important for the good governance. And these key attributes, when it provides for the inclusiveness, when it provides for the equitability, then naturally it speaks about those vulnerable persons, those voices which are not heard, to be heard in the decision making, and it is also responsive to the present and future needs of the society. When we talk about the participation, then we find that participation by both men and women. And with the judgment in Navtej Singh Johar, we see that it's not only the first sex and the second sex, or the first gender, second gender, there is a third gender also. So the participation of all the genders, that is a key cornerstone of the good governance. And participation could be the direct or through legitimate intermediate institutions or representatives, as we have chosen for the participatory or representative democracy or parliamentary form of the government. We find that participation is there through that purpose, and that needs to be informed and organized. Participation means that it needs to be informed and organized. It's not like that I have given the vote and that then there ends my duty. It should be informed also, it should be organized also, and this means that the freedom of association, freedom of expression on the one hand, and the organized civil society on the other hand. And that's why you see that whatever freedoms are there under Article 19, those are not absolute, and those are reasonably restricted also. So participation is very important. Then good governance also requires the fair legal framework that are enforced impartially. It requires the full protection of the rights of the persons, particularly those of the vulnerable and minorities. Then impartial enforcement of laws, that requires an independent judiciary. And if there would be independent judiciary, then it would result into rule of law and impartial and non-corrupt police force. That is also very important. Then equity and responsive inclusiveness, as I told you, that if a society has to work properly, then it will depend on ensuring that how the members of that society, they feel that they are in the main system, they have to be mainstreaming in the society. And this requires that all groups are to be given the opportunity to improve or to maintain their well-being. So equity and inclusiveness is the one of the aspect of the good governance. So you see and remind the provisions of the constitution where we find all these key attributes in the constitutional provisions. I'll be just focusing on that, but these are the principles, these are the characteristics of the good governance which we also find in the provisions of the constitution. Then consensus oriented, that is another key attribute of the good governance. So we see that there are several actors and as many viewpoints in a given society. So good governance requires the mediation of the different interests in the society so as to reach the broad consensus. Broad consensus in the society, that is on what is in the best interest of the whole community and how that can be achieved. So what Bentham says, maximum happiness to the maximum person, because in a country like India where the population is so high, we cannot go for the absolutism. There must be certain consensus, and that consensus to be in the best interest of the person concerned for the whole community, that would result into the good governance. And it also requires a broad and long term perspective on what is needed as sustainable human development and how to achieve those goals, that can also be seen. So international level, we are witnessing the sustainable development goals which are to be achieved by 2030, and good governance is one of the aspect in that sustainable development goals also at the international level. And this can result from the understanding of our own historical, cultural, social context in the society in which we are living. So that is very important. Then responsiveness, that is another attribute of the governance, that says that the institutions and the processes, they should try to serve the all the stakeholders within a reasonable time framework. There shall not be any delay. So the authorities, the functionaries or the organs of the state, they must function in a way so that there should not be any delay in this servicing or in providing these services. You see that some of these states in India, they have gone for the this right to service act also, that within that limited time or within the given time, that work has to be completed. And this will bring the openness and the awareness regarding what the state organs are doing. So these type of the responsiveness is also very important for a good governance. Then transparency, of course, is very important, because that means the decisions that are taken and their enforcement, they are being done in such a manner that all those decisions are following the rules and regulations. It means that the information is freely available to all. It is directly accessible to those persons who will be affected by the decisions of their enforcement. And it also provides that the information is to be given to all the persons in a language which is understandable to those persons. It's not like that a person who is coming from the village area is not knowing even Hindi properly and the information is being supplied in English. So the information is to be supplied in a language in a manner which can be understood by the persons who is asking for the information. So transparency is like that, and it should be very very effective and efficient also for bringing the good governance, because we see that the concept of efficiency in the context of good governance, it covers the natural resources and the protection of environment also. So you see that various environmental legislations, those are also bringing the transparency and effectiveness for the good governance of the country, because that the principle of sustainable development is nothing but that is leading towards the good governance, that the future has to be, the future generation has to bring to that atmosphere, to that environment which is today, we have not to destroy that. So it has to work effectively and efficiently. And then accountability is the key requirement of the good governance, because whatever you are doing, whatever the bureaucrats are doing, they must be accountable, they must be responsible, they must be liable for what they are doing. And it is not only the governmental institutions, but also the private sectors, the civil society organizations, they must also be accountable. That is, the funds from the government, whatever organizations are receiving, they must be made accountable for that, to bring the good governance, because accountability cannot be enforced without transparency and a rule of law. So accountability is very important factor for the good governance. So, in view of these attributes, in view of these characteristics of the good governance, we can say that the good governance is something which is related to the equitable principles, transparent principles, non-discriminatory principles, which are socially sensitive, because I'm talking about the inclusiveness. Then it should be participatory, and above all, it should be accountable to the people at large. And by virtue of that, we can see that the governance is a good governance or it's a bad governance. So on the basis of these concepts or the key attributes of the good governance, we find that the provisions are there in the constitution also, which speaks about the governance. And when the constitution was being drafted, the main architect of the constitution, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, when he talked about the constitutional provisions or the constitution as a whole, then he was of the opinion that ours is a constitution which is workable, and it is flexible, and at the same time it is strong enough to hold the country together, both in the peacetime and the wartime. This is one statement observation of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. But relating to the governance or good governance, the provisions which are there in the constitution, he observed that if the things go wrong under the new constitution, the reason will not be that we have had a bad constitution. What we will have to say that the people or the men, they were white. Similar observations were given by the other members in the Constitution Assembly, the as Constituent Assembly also. They were all talking about the provisions of the Constitution, and they said that this is something that the Constitution provides for the good governance, and it is the provisions, it can be workable in a good manner, in a bad manner. This depends on the institution, this depends on the persons, it depends on the men who are to work, who are to implement these provisions. And to similar aspect, there was one book written by Judge Hand. It was in 1944. That was Spirit of Liberty. When he wrote that no constitution, no law, no court can save. No court, no constitution, no law can be of much help. For what? Because if governance continues to be flounder, if governance continues to be not good, it is not the fault of the constitution, but the culture that operates it. So similar were the words of Dr. Ambedkar also, that we have the provisions in our constitution which are related to the good governance. If those provisions are not being followed, implemented properly, then it would not result into good governance, it would result into bad governance. So there was a great expectation that in the coming years, when the constitution was being framed, the constitution would move from an ideal document which is worthy of admiration to a solid commitment on the part of the government. And we see that the functions of the government, those have been outlined there, the rights of the people, they have been outlined in the constitution, the limitations on the powers of the organs of the state, those are all there. But the experience of last almost 71 years of the constitutional governance, we see that helps us to understand the working of the constitution in general, and the role of the judiciary in particular. And starting from the very preamble to the constitution, we find that it contains the ideals and aspirations of the constitution. It identifies the primary objective of the good governance, because It talks about the governance mechanism that promotes the sovereignty, socialism, secularism, democracy, and with some ethical commitment like justice, liberty, equality, fraternity, dignity to every person, every citizen, and anything that goes against the spirit of the constitution, that would be said to be the violation of the constitution. So the principles of the good governance in the constitution started from the very preamble to the constitution. Then further you see the part third of the constitution, that is fundamental rights. And fundamental rights, you see particularly article 19, article 21, and article 14. These are the basic provisions of fundamental rights, which speaks about the good governance. The argument that Article 21 guarantees fundamental right to good governance is very simple. We can say that because right to life and personal liberty under Article 21, that has been given a very, very expensive interpretation by the judiciary, so as to include many of the rights within that Article 21 of the Constitution. But you see that Article 21 guarantees all that is required for dignified life. And in the absence of the good governance, dignified life or civilized life would not be possible. Civilized life and dignified life, that should be there for the good governance. There was one decision of Allahabad High Court in 2000, Govardhan Lal versus State of UP, when the court accepted this argument that the good governance must be a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Constitution. But the court accepted only the argument. The decision was not in favor of that, because we know that the fundamental right under Article 21 is not an absolute right. It is restricted by the procedure established by law. However, if we talk about the right to good governance is to be read in Article 21, then this restriction would itself be good governance. Because what is the meaning of procedure established by law? It should be just, it should be fair, it should be reasonable. So what should be just, fair, and reasonable? That would result into good governance. So if the good governance is going to be a fundamental right under Article 21, then where would come that restriction? And because Article 21 is not an absolute right, so the court said that this cannot be a restriction. There was one petition in the Supreme Court also, Madhav Godbole, that he filed that this right to good governance should be a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Constitution. And the court said that since Article 21 is not an absolute right, hence it cannot be a fundamental right under Article 21 of the Constitution. So we see that whatever fundamental rights are there, those are speaking about the good governance, but they are not directly claimed right under the fundamental rights. Then part fourth of the Constitution, you see directive principles of the state policy. Particularly if you go through the provision under Article 37 of the Constitution, that speaks about that the part, that is the part third entirely, which speaks of the state policy. Those provisions are not enforceable by the court of law. That is clear. However, it further provides that nevertheless, these principles are fundamental in the governance of the country, and the government should take care of while making the laws that these principles should be implemented, these principles should be taken care with. So when we talk about the governance, then we find that right from Article 36 onwards, 51, the directive principles of the state policy, they speak of those governance rights, whether it's related to the minorities, women, children, SC, ST, disabled persons. Various categories are there, and those are said to be the fundamental for the governance of the country. And when the law is to be made, these things are to be taken care with. So we find that there are various laws which are related to the SC, STs, disabled, women, children. These are made by the parliament because they have to work upon Article 37, those principles which are fundamental for the governance of the country. So we find that the constitutional roots for the governance are found there in Article 37, and particularly the directive principles of the state policy. Then fundamental duties, if we talk about part 4A, though it was not originally in the Constitution, everybody must be aware about that. And Because of this Part 4A that was inserted by 42nd Amendment in 1976 after this one Singh Committee's report, then we find there are 10 duties, and later on by 86th Amendment, 11th duty has also been incorporated therein. But the duty which is there under Article 51A subclause E, and that is important for the purpose of bringing the good governance, and that is also having an impact from the preambular objective of this fraternity. And here we find that this specific duty speaks about to promote harmony and the bring and to bring the spirit of common brotherhood. So, if these things would be there, then naturally we find that the equality would be there, rule of law would be there would be no discrimination, and when there would be common brotherhood, it would lead to the good governance in a system of a country like India. Then, besides this Part 4A, you see parliamentary form of government. That is also related to the governance or good governance in the country. And there was one case decided by the Supreme Court in 1994 that was SR Bommai versus Union of India. That was, though it was related to the issues of the secularism, federalism, and other things. And this was the case where the court said that political parties are inevitable for governance. Because you see that the entire constitution, the provisions relating to political parties are missing. We find this system in the other legislation. So when we are talking about the governance, when we are talking about the rule of law, when we are talking about the constitutional governance in the country, and in that system, the very important leg of that governance, that is the political parties, those are not there in the constitutional provisions. And that's why in this SR Bombay case, you find that the court said that this is one of the important factor for the governance, this political parties, and they should also be held responsible for that, because whatever they do, they are the main functionary, or the main, we can say, actor in bringing the governance as good or bad. Because whatever we are witnessing as good governance or bad governance, it is not only through the bureaucrats, it is also because of the political parties, political leaders who are there, who are bringing this governance as good and bad. So after that, we see that constitutional provisions, then the judiciary has also done something good for the good governance. And particularly after Keshwaran Bharti case, you see that the provisions or the words which are there in the preamble, those words have been interpreted so widely, so an expansive interpretation has been given to various terms which are used in the preamble after that Keshwaran Bharti's judgment. And this basic structure you all know, that is also one of the key attribute of the good governance, that the parliamentarians at their whim, they cannot destroy the constitution, because this limitation of basic structure is there. Then we all know that India is the world's largest democracy, and with the development and in scientific and technological development, there is a revolution, we can say, in science and technology and IT department. So various problems have also been emerged because of that. And as good governance has to be brought in view of all these things, so we find that there are certain things which are very, very important, on the basis of which we can understand that how this right to information is working in bringing the good governance. I'll be giving just 3 4 examples of those systems, of those, I mean, schemes of the government, where we find that because of this right to information, the governance is leading towards a good governance. For example, this Mahatma Gandhi National Employment Guarantee Scheme, Manrega. We find that the scheme that was an outcome of the parliamentary enactment, whereby the work has been guaranteed to the persons as per the provisions of that particular act. Then to whom the work is being given, how much salary and wages are being given, these are the issues which are to be transparent. And because of this Right to Information Act, you see the volunteers from the civil societies organizations, the non-government organizations, even the individuals, they can inspect mandatory records which are being maintained by the Gram Panchayats. They can seek information, they can ask for the explanation under the schemes which are running there. The records which they make, they can be verified, and those records include the application, registration, the register of that particular work, job cards which are being issued for the registration or job card register, then employment register, muster roll, measurement books, various things, complaint register. So whatever documents are there in the possession of that particular gram panchayat, that can be inspected, and that has become a reality because of this right to information. So the impact of right to information on good governance through this Manrega scheme, that is one aspect. Then we see public distribution system, PDS system. So again, we see that the volunteers, because Right to Information Act is not saying that only the aggrieved person, only the person interested, only the person who is concerned about can go and seek the information. Any person, any citizen can go and seek the information. So this public distribution system, if I am not eligible to get these things from under that public distribution system, but as a citizen of the country, I can go and directly ask for regarding the verification or the inspection of various documents. So the volunteers, the civil society organization, they can invoke Right to Information Act, and they can collect the information and they can verify in the registers which are containing the names of the card holders, ration cards, public distribution system that speaks about that. Then stock registers as to what they have asked, what is their stock, sale, what sale they have made, the list of the BPL card holders also, because we know that in ration card there are different types of the cards, red line, blue line, whatever it is, and how many cards are there for the BPL persons, and what commodities they are having in their godown. That is the list of the commodities, the rates which are fixed by the government, and other registers which are making the supply to the offices concerned. So this can be inspected under this public distribution system. Similarly, if we talk about this integrated child development services, this is ICDS. So again, the volunteers and the civil societies, they can go and ask for the information under the Right to Information Act. Though I must tell you that Right to Information Act is also not conferring the absolute right. There are certain exemptions, there are certain exceptions under section 8 and 9 of the act, particular act of 2005. But otherwise also the inspection and the information can be sought from the public authority. So under this integrated child development service, which is relating to the Anganwadi system, then how many beneficiaries are registered there, you can seek the information. How many children are coming, you can have the attendance of those children, Anganwadi teachers attendance you can have, how they are monitoring the growth of the children as well as the pregnant women. So you can seek the information. And then there are certain immunizations like polio drop and all these things are there. So how many of them are participating, what nutritional, food they are giving to the pregnant women and to the children in Anganwadi, and whatever working there for the integrated child development services. So everything can be sought under the Right to Information Act, and it is not required that the person must be concerned from that particular stream. Primary health services, PHS, which is also very important. So these are the focused areas where we find that the information, Right to Information, is working to empower, to bring the good governance in the country. Because once the authority is aware that their working would be transparent, their working has to be, the information can be sought from there for their working, then naturally they would be honest in their working. And once they are honest in their working, then it would lead to the good governance. So In primary health services also, we see the RTI that can be used significantly to enhance the public health services. The inspection by the volunteers, civil society organizations, and all these persons in with reference to the functioning of the PHS, that can be taken. The medical officers who are there, other staff who are there, their attendance, at what time they are coming and going, their salaries, then the field visits, if any, they are doing, the supervisory visits, if they are doing, number of surgeries, how they have conducted the number of surgeries, and what is the success rate of their surgeries. So all these things which are related to the public health services, that can be taken under the right to information. Primary education, which is also very important in a country like India, and there are various schemes also which are there for the primary education, be it midday meal, be it other yojanas, the cycle, and everything. So you see that all these informations, to the extent that in a particular primary school, how many classrooms are there, how many blackboards are there, what teaching aids the teachers are using, how many toilets are there. So these type of the informations can also be sought under right to information for the primary education. So whatever information is there in the public authority, then can be sought under the Right to Information Act. So we see that the civil society is very important. The civil society organization particularly, and NGOs are very important. They are playing very, very crucial role for evaluating the policies and the actions of the government. Their functioning is like the watchdog, and they are taking care of all these things in the name of this getting the information and to bring the good governance. Though we know that the things are not always good, there are certain thorns also, these the things are, there are certain hurdles also, there are certain obstacles also, but still we find that civil society promotes the good governance through its watchdog role on the public authorities, and it is working for the welfare services, the electoral, that is the impact on the politics also, reform in the social working, social change. So collectively, they are working for the good governance. Then finally, if I would say that in conclusion of this right to information and good governance, then we find that ours is a country which is governed by rule of law. Constitution is the suprema lex, or the supreme law of the land. Under that, provisions are there for the good governance, and those principles are to be followed, observed by all, because Constitution is said to be the law of the land. Aruna Roy name, which I told you that she was very, very, I mean, instrumental in bringing this Right to Information Act. Once she said that right to information is the most fundamental law, fundamental for this country, because it has seen from local panchayats to parliament, from nondescript villages to the posh city like Delhi, and from ration shops to like the 2G, 3G, 4G scam. So this right to information can enter anywhere and everywhere, because it doesn't require the person to be aggrieved or concerned with that, and public authorities have to supply the information. So RTI Act has promoted and it has led to the good governance of the country, and information is deemed as a basic prerequisite for the good governance. There is a close relation, we can say, between right to information and good governance, and the human security, shelter, food, environment, employment, as I have given you the examples, these are all coming under the bound of the right to information. So in the absence of information, people cannot live a dignified life, which is the preambular objective, and which has to be ensured for all the citizens. And we see that if they are not to lead the dignified life, they would remain in the marginalized group of the society. That will not result in the good governance. So right to information is important for bringing the good governance, and that is doing like that. And we see that it is a powerful instrument to protect the fundamental rights of the people. Access to information by the public, that is essential element for or prerequisite of the good governance. So we see that RTI Act has given the voice to the aspirations of the ordinary citizens, because you see in a public authority like we are in the university, we find that every day there are certain applications which are seeking for the information, though it is sometimes considered that the fake applications are also coming. But whatever it is, we find that because of these applications under right to information, the functioning of the public authorities has been changed, and now it is moving towards the good governance, ensuring accountability, ensuring the transparency, ensuring the inclusiveness in the system. And since 2005, that is with the enforcement of the Right Information Act till now, one can say that right information has had made an impact which is felt in the functioning of the government bodies. And the officials have given active, conscious, regular, or we can say they are punctual also, they are accountable and responsible for the system. The corruption to some extent, I can say is minimized, because the political parties are not the part, some of the authorities are not the part, the private authorities are not the part. So public authorities are the part of the right information. So the corruption to some extent is minimized. People do feel that now they are empowered, they can seek the information from the public authorities. And finally, wrapping up this lecture, I would say that the impact of RTI on good governance, that I must say that if we need to see its impact in real term, then we need to act. ACT, act. That means action will change the things. ACT, we have to act. If we want to see the impact of this right information, which may result into good governance, then we must say that we need to act. Action will change the things, or action will control the corruption in due course of time. So ACT is important, that act has to be taken care with if we want that good governance is to be there. And being a citizen of the country like India, it is our duty that we should see that the governance should be good. And for that, we have to take records of right to information, which is one of the tool in the hands of the citizenry of the country. So with these words, I would like to thank to the organizers for giving me the opportunity for sharing my thoughts on right to information and good governance. So thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. A very good and informative and academic lecture has been delivered by you for this